I should probably clarify, when I say quite possibly a Satanist, I don't necessarily
Yeah.
mean a member of any formal organization or participating in this or that ritual, but more a matter of his general outlook, his preoccupations and obsessions, and what to be an overriding influence on his life. Although we will, as we'll get into, there is, reasons to suspect that, some more specific arrangement may have been involved. Uh, can you give a sense? You talked about this biographer Paine's impression of Marx. Tell us about the impression that people who knew him intimately had of him, the terms in which they described him often.
Yeah, and that's something too that at the very least gives pause, right? I mean, you had from phrases like from his wife, right, calling him my wicked knave, uh, his son, my dear devil, calling him phrases like that, which people like Wormbraun make a big deal of, and which his sympathetic biographers either ignore altogether or say, "Oh, this is cute," right? They don't see it as anything diabolical or symptomatic of anything deeper or darker or larger. But there's also phrases like when Ingalls first met him, Thomas, he wrote this weird poem, and something about poetry in these guys. It's another thing, but Ingalls described him as a monster of 10,000 devils, and he talked about this black man from Trier, and the word black is used there not in the sense that you would use of like color or skin color or ethnicity or anything like that,
Right.
but like a brooding presence, like a darkness who hops and jumps and leaps. He described him this really awful way, and in fact, some of the translations, the German translations of that poem, it could be monster of 10,000 demons or monster of 10,000 devils, or even a couple of other translations. His father asked him in this letter, it's a fascinating letter from March 2nd, 1837. He wants to know if this heart of his is governed by a demon, as he asked. And if so, is that demon heavenly or Faustian? Something about Faust with these guys. Marx was obsessed with Faust. Goethe's Faust, the classic drama about a Faustian bargain, and the character, the demon devil character, Mephistopheles. And people even said, people who knew him, one of his friends, Heinzen, Karl Heinzen, said that he was chanting the words of Faust. Looked at me with eyes, wet eyes like a goblin, right? Chanting the words of Faust, holding me under his spell. And one of the biographers of Marx, Francis Wien, when he deals with this section with Heinzen, he finds it like attractive, playful, kind of fun, right? And it's just amazing how two different biographers can read something, right, and see it in a completely different way, depending on whether or not you like the guy or don't like the guy. And they would say, well, you don't like the guy, Kengor. You're giving it the worst possible interpretation. No, I mean, I try on each individual case to say it could be this, it could be that. For me, it's the whole larger composite of all of that stuff
Right.
that, when put together, is very troubling and suggestive of some darker things. But Heinzen described him as chanting the words of Faust. Chanting the words of Faust. I mean, that's a funny phrase, isn't it? Chanting the words of Faust. And his favorite line from Faust, which is in a number of his writings, and Paine and other biographers have noted this, is where Mephistopheles says, "Everything that exists deserves to perish." Right? Everything that exists deserves to perish. So, Thomas, if someone came up to you and me and said, "Hey, give me your favorite line," right? out of, out of wherever, whatever. Maybe give a scripture verse, or my maybe some verse in Latin, or whatever that may be. Not afraid, something like that, right? Would you say something? Yes, everything that exists deserves to perish, right? So that of all things, and I think this is probably what you're getting at when you say, well, that would at least be kind of, for lack of a better word, Satanistic, right? That very kind of wish. Everything that exists deserves to perish. And you see that in Marx's plays, right? I shall howl gigantic curses at mankind. I will smash the world to pieces, right? So that's reflective too of something that, to answer the question of Marx's father, would be, more Faustian than heavenly.
We're going to talk about the way he treated people around him, especially his family in general. But first, let's talk about that in connection with this spiritual and possibly satanic stuff. Well, you mentioned his obsession with Faust, a story about a man who makes a pact with or sells his soul to the devil, and in order to gain power. And I think in all the versions of the story that I know of, that's basically his motivation. He also there was also I forget if maybe I'm remembering the book wrong, but I think he had a preoccupation with suicide pacts, or if not that was at least something that manifested itself in the life of a number of his children. Was that something
Yeah,
that came up in his literature as well, or was that just something that happened in his life?
yeah. His plays, his poetic works are. By the way, he fancied himself a poet. I mean, he wanted to be a poet, and that was kind of his love, his hidden love. So, which is why again you can't ignore this stuff. He actually published poetry in some journals, and a lot of it was written when he was younger. Yes, but Marxist sympathizers, progressives who like him, if you're gonna do dramas and films like The Young Marx, okay, celebrating, elevating, cheering on, heralding the young Marx, then you can't ignore this stuff from the life of young Marx. And also beyond that, he was writing this stuff when, in some cases, when he did his dissertation, same decade that he wrote the Communist Manifesto. But the plays are rife with darkness, the pale maiden, right? See this sword, the prince of darkness sold it to me, right? This sword, this blood dark sword shall stab erringly within thy soul, right? That's his 1841 poem I put at the front of the book. They suicide, suicide pacts. The two lovers go off together and take suicide. They take poison. Come with me, my darling, down below. Right? Horrible stuff. And yet, here's why I think some of the stuff really matters. Is in so many ways where the private, the whatever, the poetic becomes the personal in Marx. Marx had two daughters who committed suicide in suicide pacts with their husbands by drinking poison. Okay, and so here again, I could see the Marx defender, right? Are you saying that they read one of Marx's plays? No, I don't know, but I mean, can you name another figure for me in all of human history who had two daughters who killed themselves in suicide pacts with their husbands by drinking poison? And the father wrote plays about suicide pacts. I mean, come on, guys, right? I didn't see any of this in God and Hillary Clinton. All right, I didn't see any of this in God and George W. Bush. This is bizarre, weird, sick stuff. By the way, of the two daughters, one of them, the one who was married to Edward Aveling, who himself was like a junior Marx, socialist, scoundrel, cheated on his wife, refused to work, leached off of everybody else, sponged money off of everybody else, a moocher like Marx the moocher. He backed out of the suicide pact after he gave Eleanor the poison. And some people thought that he should have been tried for murder, which he probably should have. The other suicide pact that included Marx's son-in-law Paul Lafargue, who was partly Cuban. So according to Marx, that meant that he was partly Negro. And there's a letter between him and Engels where they're trying to deduce how much, quote unquote, N-word blood Paul has in him, either 1/8 or 1/12. And they're marveling over his cranial size and comparing it to the race of Negroes and comparing it to apes, all kinds of horrible stuff. So Marx's view of his son-in-law, who he called Negrillo or the gorilla, needless to say, the son-in-law probably had pretty low self-esteem. All of which, Thomas, you would think would get a figure canceled by the champions of our cancel culture today, but not Karl Marx, right? He's one of, he's somebody that we should like. Professors, put busts of Karl Marx in your office, right? Kind of like Margaret Sanger. Spoke to the Silver Lake, New Jersey chapter of the KKK in May 1926. Right here in your 1938 Houghton Mifflin biography, pages 366, 367. We'll look the other way, right? Amazing what they can get away with.
What about the bedtime story that he told to his children, going back to the Faust theme?
Oh, the Hans Rockel story. Yeah, you're the first person to ask me about that. I'm surprised that no one else has. And his daughters talk about this, that they would walk on Sunday morning to Hampstead Heath in London, and the father would tell them the story about this toy maker named Hans Rockel, who had this enchanted toy shop with all kinds of enchanting little figures, right? Dwarves and kings and queens and all these other things. And he had made this pact as well, where he sold his soul. He owed something to the devil, and the daughters said that the way that their father told this story and almost shouted it as they walked used to terrify them. They said it was more terrifying than the stories of, I'm trying to think what the guy's name was. He's not E.F.H. Hoffman. Is that the right word? He was kind of like Stephen King of the day. And they said that these stories were even more scary than some of the Hoffman thrillers of the day. Payne, too, focuses on this. And he thinks that Hans Rockel, in this case, might be another example of almost autobiography by Marx, where Marx himself is that person. And here again, another case you say, I don't know for sure if that's the case, but you add up that and that and that and that and that, and then you have all these different things. You look at them all together, and you say, can we at least agree that this is pretty disturbing, right? It is.